The wind tore across the frozen forest like a living thing, shrieking through skeletal trees and rattling the brittle branches above. Snow, sharp as glass, stung Emily's cheeks as she pressed forward, dragging her small legs through drifts that rose higher than her knees. Her tiny hands were raw, clutching the threadbare scarf her mother had left her, trying to shield Max, her trembling puppy, from the bitter cold. Max whimpered and nuzzled against her chest, his tiny body shivering violently, and she whispered words she barely believed herself. "We'll make it. We have to." The forest stretched endlessly, a frozen wasteland of white and gray. Every step was a battle, every breath a cloud of frost in the air. Emily's stomach gnawed at her, hollow and aching, but the thought of losing Max was far worse. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, soft and comforting, warning her of the dangers of winter, of trusting the wilderness too easily, of holding on to hope even when it seemed gone. Now, she clung to those words as desperately as she clutched Max. A distant howl broke the brittle silence. Emily froze, her small body shaking, her heart hammering like a drum in her chest. Wolves. She had heard of them before, in bedtime stories and warnings, but she had never expected to hear them now, circling in the shadows, watching, waiting. She pressed Max closer and inched toward a cluster of trees, their gnarled roots forming a shallow hollow she could hide in. The howl came again, closer this time, a ghostly echo of hunger and wildness. Emily held her breath, willing the creatures not to see them, her mind racing through every tale her mother had told, every survival trick she might remember. Her fingers were stiff and numb, her legs shaking from exhaustion, and yet she pushed on, knowing that stopping was not an option. The snow crunched beneath her boots, and Max yipped softly, fearful of the unseen eyes tracking them. She spotted a fallen log, half buried in snow, and crawled behind it, pulling Max under her coat. The wind whipped around them, carrying with it the scent of pine and ice, of danger just beyond the horizon. Emily's eyes filled with tears she refused to shed, for there was no time for crying, only surviving. Hours passed, though they felt like days. Her fingers had lost all feeling. Her lips were blue. Max's warmth was the only thing keeping her from succumbing to the cold entirely. She hugged him close, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Every snap of a branch, every distant animal cry, sent her heart racing. And yet, there was beauty in the desolation. The snow sparkled like diamonds beneath the pale light. The frozen river glimmered like glass stretching endlessly, and for a fleeting moment, Emily allowed herself to marvel at it, even as her teeth chattered and her muscles screamed in protest. The sun began to dip behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the frozen expanse. The temperature dropped further, biting into her skin with merciless teeth. Emily spotted an abandoned cabin in the distance, half collapsed, its roof sagging under the weight of snow. A flicker of hope ignited in her chest. She moved toward it slowly, carefully, Max tucked safely under her coat. Each step was perilous. The snow was deep, and ice threatened to send her plunging into hidden crevices. But she pressed on, driven by exhaustion and desperation in equal measure. Reaching the cabin, she tried the door. It was frozen shut. Her small fists pounded against it, creating only hollow echoes. She searched the perimeter and found a broken window, jagged edges scraping her hands as she forced herself inside. The interior was dark, smelling of old wood and decay, but it was dry. Emily collapsed onto the floor, Max curling against her chest. She closed her eyes, feeling the exhaustion crush her body shaking uncontrollably. For a brief moment, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only her and Max and the fragile warmth they shared. She whispered stories to him, tales of forests, rivers, and adventures, trying to drown out the howls and the wind that threatened to swallow them whole. She imagined her parents there, smiling at her bravery, guiding her hand, protecting her as they had before. The tears came then, freezing against her cheeks, but she did not care. They were evidence that she was still alive, that she still felt, that she still hoped. Night fell, deep and impenetrable, and the forest became a monster of shadows and silence. Emily wrapped herself and Max in the scarf once more, hugging him as tightly as she could, her body a fragile shield against the cold. She listened to the wind, to the creak of the cabin, to the distant howl of wolves, and promised herself she would not give up, no matter how far, no matter how lonely, no matter how cold. Hours stretched into an eternity, the world outside a frozen prison, and Emily's mind wandered. She thought of her family, of laughter by the fireplace, of warm hands holding hers, of the puppy she had begged to keep despite the hardships. She thought of the adventures she might still have, if only she could survive this night. And as the first light of dawn crept weakly through the broken window, glinting off the snow outside, Emily opened her eyes, determined to keep moving, determined to survive, determined to protect Max, her last tether to hope, to warmth, to life itself. The storm had not relented. Snow fell in thick, relentless sheets, coating the forest in a blinding white that made it impossible to tell where the trees ended and the world began. Emily's small body shivered violently as she crawled from the cabin. Max clutched tightly to her chest. She had managed a few hours of rest, but the cold had seeped deep into her bones, and hunger clawed at her belly like a living thing. Her tiny legs moved mechanically, each step an act of will against the weight of exhaustion and frost. A low rumble shook the forest floor, the sound of shifting snow and hidden ice. Emily froze. Max yipped softly, sensing the danger she could not yet see. She scanned the treeline and caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow slipping through the blizzard, tall, steady, deliberate. Her heart leapt, a mixture of hope and fear. Could it be someone, or something worse, drawn by the same storm that threatened her life? The figure stopped just beyond the edge of the clearing, and Emily squinted, trying to make sense of it. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his movements controlled, deliberate, almost silent despite the snow underfoot. His eyes, sharp and observant, scanned the surroundings before settling on her. Emily wanted to run, but her legs refused. She held Max tighter, instinctively hiding him beneath her coat. The stranger did not approach immediately. Instead, he crouched low behind a tree, watching, waiting. Emily could feel his gaze on her, steady and unthreatening, and slowly, a fragile thread of trust began to form. She had learned too well that the wilderness offered no mercy, that humans could be as dangerous as wild beasts. But there was something different about him, something calm and deliberate. Hours passed as Emily moved cautiously through the forest, the stranger following silently at a distance. He left small signs of guidance: a broken branch pointing a safe path, a cleared patch of snow where she could rest without fear of falling through hidden ice. She noticed the pattern slowly, understanding that he was helping without forcing contact. It was a silent communication, a bond formed without words. And for the first time in days, Emily felt a flicker of hope. They reached a frozen river, its surface glittering like glass but treacherous beneath the weight of snow. Emily's small legs trembled as she stepped onto the ice, Max whimpering at her side. She felt the cold bite deeper, and one misstep could send her plunging into the icy water. A crack echoed beneath her feet, and panic surged. She froze, paralyzed, and Max barked, a tiny, frantic sound. The shadow was suddenly beside her, strong hands gripping her arms, steadying her against the ice. "Careful," a voice said, calm and controlled, yet gentle enough to reach her frayed nerves. Emily blinked, startled by the presence, but too exhausted to question it. The man guided her carefully across the river, each step precise, measured, a lifeline in a world that had offered none. Once across, he set her down on safe ground, and Emily collapsed. Max burrowed against her chest. The man knelt beside her, silently handing her a small bundle, a blanket, some dried food, and a flask of water. She looked at him, her eyes wide with disbelief, and for the first time allowed herself to speak. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking. He nodded, offering no words in return, only a steady, reassuring gaze that told her she was not alone anymore. Days blended into nights as the storm persisted, and Emily began to follow him reluctantly. He never forced her, never demanded trust, only showed it through actions, saving Max from hidden snare, building a small fire against the bitter wind, leaving food along their path. Slowly, a rhythm formed between them, unspoken but undeniable. Emily began to rely on his presence, drawing strength from his silent vigilance. And in return, he watched her with careful, protective eyes, as if guarding something precious. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ice-laden trees, Emily stumbled across a patch of disturbed snow. She knelt and unearthed a frozen envelope, brittle and cracked. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, revealing a letter from her family, words of love and encouragement preserved in fragile ink. Tears blurred her vision, freezing against her cheeks. She read and reread it, the memories of laughter, warmth, and safety flooding back. The stranger watched quietly from a few feet away, giving her space to grieve. Emily finally looked up, meeting his gaze for the first time fully. There was no judgment, no questions, only understanding. In that moment, she realized she trusted him. She trusted him to keep her alive, to guide her through this frozen wasteland, and perhaps to show her that hope could survive even the harshest winter. The following days brought new trials. They faced avalanches that thundered through the mountains, wolves that stalked them silently, and the constant gnaw of hunger. Emily learned to read the subtle signs of danger, guided by the steady presence of her silent protector. Max grew stronger under their care, his small body resilient, his eyes bright with the spark of life. One night, huddled together under a makeshift shelter of fallen branches and snow, Emily whispered to Max about their journey. She spoke of bravery, of perseverance, and of the mysterious man who had become their guardian. She no longer feared the forest entirely. It was still dangerous, still unforgiving, but it was also a place of wonder, a place where trust and courage could blossom, even in the coldest depths. And as the first pale light of dawn filtered through the trees, Emily felt a quiet determination stir within her. She would survive. She would protect Max. And with the stranger by her side, guiding her silently, she believed they could endure whatever the forest or life itself dared to throw at them. The wind had changed. It was no longer the soft whisper of snowflakes falling on branches or the sharp sting of ice against cheeks. Now it roared through the forest like a beast awakened, shaking the trees, rattling the frozen river, and tossing snow in great white clouds that blinded the path ahead. Emily clutched Max tightly, his small body trembling, her own limbs numb from the cold, and she followed the steady figure that had become her lifeline. Every step felt heavier, every breath sharper. Danger was no longer a distant threat. It was here, immediate, relentless. They reached the edge of a narrow valley, the remnants of an old cabin perched precariously on the slope above. Snow had piled against it like a mountain, and ice glazed the surrounding trees. Emily's stomach twisted with fear. The cabin had seemed like a refuge days ago, but now it was a trap, its roof sagging, threatening to collapse under the weight of snow. She wanted to turn back, but the forest offered no safety. The stranger stood silently beside her, scanning the slope with sharp, calculating eyes, his hand resting lightly on the strap of his pack. Emily felt a strange mixture of fear and reassurance. He had been guiding her all this way. Now, she understood that the final test lay ahead. The first tremor came without warning. Snow dislodged from the slope above, cascading in a white wave down the hillside. Emily froze, Max yipping frantically. The stranger grabbed her arm, pulling her to the side, his movements precise, practiced, controlled. The avalanche roared past, a wall of white fury, and Emily felt the wind lift her hair, bury her ears, and nearly push her to the ground. Snow packed around her like cement, but the stranger's grip held her steady. They scrambled together, sliding across the ice, hands digging into frozen roots, Max tumbling safely in Emily's arms. When they reached the base of the slope, Emily gasped, her body trembling from both cold and terror. Her small fingers clutched Max's fur, and she looked up at the cabin, knowing that it might collapse entirely. The stranger pointed to a narrow passage between two trees, a safe route down the valley. Without a word, he led her, guiding every step, supporting her weight, keeping her from slipping into the icy river below. Every movement was calculated, urgent, yet calm. He was both shield and guide, a quiet force against chaos. Hours later, they reached a small clearing where the wind was less cruel. Emily collapsed, her body shaking uncontrollably, Max curling against her chest. The stranger knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him, eyes wide and wet, searching for words she could not find. He simply nodded, a silent promise that they had survived, that they were still alive, and that hope was not gone. As the snow settled and the storm began to wane, Emily noticed something in the distance. A helicopter cutting through the gray sky, blades chopping the air with mechanical precision. She gasped, relief flooding her chest, but it was tempered by a bitter ache. She had survived, yes, but the forest had left its mark, and the memories of her lost family lingered like frozen ghosts in her mind. The stranger looked up at the helicopter, assessing, then turned to her, and for the first time, spoke. His voice was calm, steady, full of quiet authority. It's your chance to be safe now. You've done everything you could to survive. Trust yourself to take it. Emily nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks, and for the first time allowed herself to feel the full weight of gratitude and relief. She held Max close, whispering promises of safety and warmth. The stranger watched, his expression unreadable but tender, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had forged through frostbite, fear, and relentless survival. As the helicopter touched down, kicking up snow in blinding clouds, Emily took a deep breath. She looked back once at the forest that had threatened to consume her, and then at the stranger whose presence had been both guardian and guide. She realized that she was no longer the fragile child who had stumbled through the storm. She was stronger, wiser, capable of courage that she had never imagined. Max barked softly, sensing the change, and Emily smiled through tears, a fragile but shining ember of hope in her chest. The stranger helped her into the helicopter, lifting Max carefully. As the rotors began to churn the air, Emily pressed her forehead against the window, watching the snow-blanketed forest recede. The storm was still there, still powerful, but she had survived it. She had endured the cold, the fear, the hunger, and emerged not unscathed, but alive and unbroken. From the safety of the cabin they had left behind, she would remember the silence, the fear, and the quiet strength of the one who had saved her. The Navy SEAL had been more than a rescuer. He had been a teacher of resilience, a guide through despair, a presence that reminded her that even in the most merciless winter, courage could endure. As the helicopter lifted higher, Emily whispered to Max, her voice steady, confident, and full of quiet determination. We made it. We survived, and we'll never forget. Max nuzzled her, and for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine warmth, light, and safety once more. The storm remained behind, a frozen testament to hardship and survival. Ahead was a world of possibilities, of hope rebuilt from snow and fear, a world where Emily could grow, learn, and carry the lessons of courage and trust forward. And in the quiet space of her heart, she knew that even in the coldest, harshest winters, there would always be someone to guide her, a hand to hold, and a fire to keep her warm. The forest disappeared beneath the clouds. The wind quieted, and Emily's eyes, once wide with fear, now shone with determination. She had survived the storm, she had protected Max, and she had discovered the strength to face whatever came next.